engineer by training, who now specializes in data governance and has studied the emerging paradigms of data governance, internationally. We have Mr. Bobby, who is sitting here to my right. He's an advocate by profession. The role that, and he's just like all of us, he's also a data subject, if I were to use the terminology that Dr. Abhisek introduced, somebody who does generate data with various activities on various platforms. So that's the second panelist. To my left, I have Professor Pratima Murthy, who is a senior professor of psychiatry and is also the director of NIMHANS at present. She is foremost a very experienced clinician and is also a policymaker right now. She has a keen interest in history, and she's also overseeing, or to an extent, we are digitizing, just like very many centers in the country are. We are digitizing very many of our, medical records. So that's the angle that I would be exploring with Professor Pratima. And we have Professor Animesh, whom you have already heard in the earlier part. He is a computer science researcher who has extensively used open source data and data, one could say, scraped or sourced from various sources for purposes like, moderation, detection of toxicity in social media. So those kind of purposes. One could say he is one of the consumers of data because his research depends on the availability of a lot of data. That's the role that I am framing for him to kind of build up on the story. So with that introduction, let's look at the problem. So most of these models that we use, like ChatGPT, etc., are probably trained on something called tokens, which we are, for simplicity, we will call them words. About 15 trillion words. Now, to just put it in perspective, that's about 150 million books. That's probably more books than any single library holds. Then I also, because I am a number geek, I also try to find out if somebody has measured how much does a normal person speak in their lifetime. So a normal person apparently utters 16,000 words per day, and therefore 450 million in a lifetime. So you'll need about 30,000 people being recorded continuously as across their lifetime to generate enough data to train models like, say, Llama 3.1 or Llama 3.2. And this 15 trillion has been surpassed many a times now. So the latest models that use probably are trained on twice the number of words than that. So I think a curious person would think, where does so much data come from? So that's one of the things we will look at. One of the cliché that's pretty much used these days is that AI is the industrial revolution and data is the oil. So we are going to look at, if data is the new oil and AI is the new industrial revolution, then where are the benefits going? So that's why if you look at the title, it's rather vague. Our data, their models, and whose benefit? That is something that we are going to try and discuss. And we'll see how the discussion goes through. But to open it up, I would just request Professor Animesh to, as briefly and as simply, assuming we know 8th standard mathematics, just with some analogy, make us understand, why does this generation of models require such humongous data? And where does this data come from? So there are two questions there.
Okay. Very good questions, but very tough questions. So data comes from, as you said, digitized books, materials published on websites. So some of them are free and taken as is. Some of them are illegally taken, and people have filed lawsuits, like book writers have, authors have filed lawsuits. Like, for instance, you might have seen J.K. Rowling and many other people have had lawsuits against OpenAI because all their books have been digitized and included into the training pipeline of ChatGPT, like without their consent. So, I mean, forget about royalty, not even consent. So data comes from these sources. Then data could also come from more structured sources like databases like where you have, tables, things stored in tables, like name, age, etc., etc. So all these are like more structured. So you have unstructured data, you have structured data, you have multimodal data, which could be in the form of images, speech, video. So all of these like kind of, are agglomerated together to form the pool of data that you have. Now coming to the second part. So what we have observed, I mean, traditional machine learning, if you look at, so it is divided into two types, two broad types. One is called supervised learning, and the other is unsupervised learning. So most of these generative AI tools that you see today are supervised learners. So what do we mean by that? So they need labels. Okay, so they need labels with the data to learn something about the data, to learn patterns about the data. Now, when you go to the web, when you go to look into digitized books, etc., where do you get labels? I mean, there is no label at all. So then the easiest way that these people try to, simulate a situation where you have a label is to predict the next token, right? You say you are reading like a piece of sentence. We as humans also keep on doing this. So if you like, hide the next word and you try to guess what this next word will be, some guessing will come, right? And then like it is as if like you are making a guess on all the words that are there in the vocabulary, and it's like a probability distribution. So you are computing this probability. This is what all Gen AI models are doing. You are computing this probability distribution on all the tokens in the vocabulary or all the words in the vocabulary. Now the one which is like the highest probability, which has the highest probability, you return that, or you fill in the blanks with that. Now you keep on doing this for each and every new word, okay, as you go on reading the sentence. So this is your training. So that's why tokens are so important. Okay. And that's how you like, so the entire model is built on like these labels, which are like the next tokens. So these are called next token generators. These models are called next token generators.
So, I mean, if I were to look at it as, as a layman, we kind of found a trick.
Yes.
Don't need annotators.
Yes.
The book is self-annotated because words have an order to themselves.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if I can scrape that from somewhere, meaningful text, then I have a good data set to train on. Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Abhisek? Would you want to add something to this in terms of where the data is sourced from and what kind of conflicts arise from that?
I think Animesh summarized it to the best possible extent. I would just add another layer to the complexity of the thing, that what Animesh basically described right now is the basic backbone of any of these Gen AI models, and then on top of that there are different other fine tuning that they do. For example, let's say when we are interacting with a deployed system like ChatGPT, they also learn through human feedback as well. When, like, I think all of us might have experienced at least one of such interactions where you would ask something to ChatGPT, and then it will give you 2 or 3 different responses, and you have to select which one do you prefer. And so they also elicit these sorts of human feedback, which would also make, like what Animesh said is basically how they could frame the next sentence, next words, and generate the sentences. And also then there are some task specific things which they learn as well, which is through this human feedback that they learn. Like when we are giving these feedbacks, so they also help in improving the models continuously as well.
Great. Okay. Don't mute yourself yet, because the next question is again for you. To your knowledge, how much of real world medical data is actually is available on one of these data sets like FineWeb, etc.? To your knowledge, is real world medical data a part of these data sets?
There is no sacrosanct answer to this, because like everyone knows that that GPT or Llama is trained on the whole web, but then to what extent all these data are part of it is an enigma to everyone. However, one way to answer this question would also be that while using these systems, people are leaking their data as well. Like, for example, if I get my medical test, like blood test report, not everything is easily understandable to me. And let's say I have an appointment with the doctor 1 week later, what would I do? I would just upload this thing to ChatGPT and ask, like, okay, give me the summary of like how my blood test report looks like. Sometimes people like also like we have seen that many people also interact with ChatGPT just because they don't have any easy access to doctors, and so it's a 24/7 doctor available to you. So there are many of these medical information which are being leaked to ChatGPT and Gemini through interaction as well. So there is one sort of leakage which might have happened through while the pre-training was happening, but then no one has no one can say with absolute guarantee that this has happened. But then there is a process, like it's not, these systems are not static, they are learning every day, and while these interactions are happening also there is a lot of leakage going on. So it's hard to quantify it in a nutshell.
Right, right. Thank you. And I think that's part of the. I mean, I find it slightly uncomfortable to not have a finger on as a doctor that what fraction of this or have these models been ever exposed to real medical data or not, and what fraction arising from what sources. But I think that's part of the enigma. Yeah.
Yes, so there are these specialized LLMs which claim that they are for medical purposes, like MedPalm.
Yes.
And also, I think there is MedLama or something like that. So, which claim that they have medical records, but they only, like, one releases only the weights, model weights, and the other releases nothing. So therefore, there is no way to verify like what they have used and what they have not used.
Right, sir. In fact, thank you for bringing MedPalm up. So we'll take that as an example. That's a model from Google. It was an association which Google formed with a university hospital, not one, actually 3 university hospitals. And it has remained behind closed doors. I mean, not everybody can use it. We can't even infer from it locally. We have to send our data to Google to use that, which brings me to the other part of the thing. Such collaborations, and this question is for Professor Pratima. I mean, it's definitely a field which is very active right now, and it's a question of who seizes the opportunity. As a policymaker and to an extent a custodian of records that actually span from 1800s in our case, because we have in terms of the museum and digitizing old records which are very rich. What is your take on this? By digitizing, we have converted them to be readily ingestible by these models. I mean, how does that make you feel? What do you think?
Mixed feelings. First of all, I mean, I think the whole idea of making records, in a digitized format is to preserve the records, because, we do know records get crumbly, paper records don't last forever, they can get destroyed, etc. But obviously, at some stage, there's an excitement about using this information meaningfully. So I remember that, when we saw these records for the first time, which is probably about 20 years ago, the sheer excitement, I remember actually using that data painstakingly, writing it all down from the register and presenting it at a world conference. This was a record on forensic admissions to NIMHANS. And then, at that time, there was no information available about what kind of crimes people committed and came to the mental hospital, what was their background. So fascinating data. So imagine having the same thing available now in a digitized format. And of course, now starts the dilemma about how people are going to use it. And therefore, I mean, what do we do with data? And this is not true just of legacy data that we might have. It might be collaborative data across projects. I do know some international projects which are also struggling with this. Obviously, there is a general diktat that data that is collected from taxpayers' money should be put out in a public forum so that it can be subject to analysis, etc. That's on the one hand. So it is important to put out data there, but then who uses the data becomes the next question. And therefore, to be able to use such data, there are a very series of procedural aspects where people with a certain amount of standing, research standing, need to apply for this data. It needs to be vetted by by a panel of experts. It needs ethical approval, and then you obviously give it out. But then the point that Dr. Dash made, and then Dr. Animesh made subsequently, raises another worry to me, that if I shared, for example, my data on a Google platform, would any AI system actually be able to access it? You just said a little while ago that the data need not all be from legitimate sources. It can also be illegal. And therefore, what kind of platform do I share my data on to keep it secure? I no longer know. So, and that appears to be now the worry about using platforms like Google, etc., which might have AI search engines of their own, which can mine the data. Another example that I can give you is when we do research, we do something called meta-analysis. And meta-analysis are very useful to inform us about what works in what populations, what is the evidence base, and so on. Now, I can see meta-analysis, and in meta-analysis, you have to ask all the right questions. I mean, you have to choose the kind of studies very carefully, have inclusion and exclusion criteria. Now, if all I need to do is probably put all this data on ChatGPT, will I get the same kind of accuracy, or will I not? Will there be, how will it inform me? Is another second. Actually, I have more questions and responses. So that's second.
Everybody
question.
actually has.
The third is, of course, the moment the larger issue about legacy data. In hospitals, for example, we not only have patient-related data, we also have their diagnostic investigations, the treatment that they're given, which can actually be excellent to develop your standards of procedure, what appears to work in whom. Last week, I was just listening to somebody from Switzerland whose startup, which now can predict from certain EEG parameters and certain ECG parameters, the response to either what is called a specific serotonergic reuptake inhibitor or a SNRI, which is a noradrenergic inhibitor for depression. That's fascinating. So if I could use my data to be able to have those predictions, I could make personalized care a reality without worrying too much about doing further investigations based on all my legacy data. So it's a fascinating thought, but what it is going to be like in reality is the question looming large in everybody's mind.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. And I mean, yes, that was part of my question that I didn't phrase initially. Have you have you come across proposals and nudges to, share the large scale data that we have for training deep learning models, not necessarily generative, deep learning models?
Yes, we had a discussion on this, but I think it has remained a discussion. But certainly there is a huge interest in applying AI and machine learning to all of this, and this is humongous. I mean,
That's what
possibly the largest archive you'll ever get in the world. And remember, going forward, also we've been digitizing information.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's tremendous.
We will have a lot of suitors for this, is what I'm saying.
The other thing is the sharing of information, and and I can see that the more platforms. I mean, for example, in Karnataka, something called the e-Manas was started. The e-Manas basically is a platform where you get information in primary health care about patients who come to the service. Now, the idea is that you don't duplicate the same data to the next person that the individual might go to. So you need to be able to transfer that data, the portability of the data. Now, the worry about portability is how visible or how how it becomes whatever, becomes known to everybody and their brother. Instead, we've had that kind of leakage of a whole lot of private data in different fora and personal data like this. And like he said, one is, of course, if you ask Chat GPT for an interpretation, but my worry is even if you don't ask Chat GPT for an interpretation, can your data get used for that purpose without your explicit consent? So we know AI, for example, if I have booked a ticket on my phone to go to Calcutta, it'll probably tell me what are all the sites I must see in Calcutta. So already, AI is being used
fairly intrusive.
to intrude into your life. So what happens then with this large set of data going forward?
Right. Thank you, ma'am. So, I think what we have established is, number one, the current generation of Gen AI models, because of the very paradigm in which they are trained, are terribly data hungry. And that allows us to get away with the painful part of getting humans to annotate data. But the flip side is it requires a lot of data. Then we moved on to look at, from a data custodian angle, what kind of, how one is tempted to, it feels almost criminal to be sitting on so much of usable information and to not be using it. But then there is also this problem of when you make it open source, what are the terms and conditions of that? And from that, I'm going to move on.
So, this is, I find a very nice correlate with my wife's jewels. So she gets a lot of them, but she never wears it because she says like, if I go wearing them, somebody will steal it. So this is very similar. So you have all the data with you, but you don't want to share because then there is a lot of
Is it because the society is not safe enough?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. That's another way to look at. So you see, if you could standardize or make things normative, not stealing to be a normative thing in the society. So that's, I think, one of the biggest approaches that one needs to do. Like, for instance, I was in Singapore, and there in roads, etc., they don't litter. Also, about urinating in public, etc., it's zero. Why? Because each and every nook and corner have accessible toilets. So, and they have invested in that. So therefore, this, if you call it a crime, so this crime has almost vanished from their population. So if we could have this kind of infrastructure in place, this kind of standardizations in place, then at some point we could hope that it would become normative in the society to not steal someone's data, to not do inadvertent use of this data.
I'm going to just respond to what Animesh said, since you took the analogy of jewels.
Yeah.
One of the important things is about ownership. And I think a lot of people are very hesitant to part with their section of the data because it means a loss of ownership.
True.
And that is something that, again, we need to be able to come to terms with. I don't know whether the resolution that you provided is going to answer that, because this makes everything very universal, and not even universal. It probably belongs to that open AI source.
Yeah.
And so why should A give up their data to be able to, So I think there's a lot of worry.
Forget about others. My wife does not want to part with her jewels with her own daughter. He says you should get separate jewels for her.
From AI to jewels.
So that's the point of ownership.
Right. And that's where Bobby comes in. And just let me phrase this in my mind. Your role is of a data principal. So truly, when we are having this discussion, the data is yours. If the question is asked, as Abhisek had said, the data belongs to the person who generated it, right? So as a person who generates data, not only in the hospital, but otherwise too, what are the reasonable expectations you have of, going forward in this AI era? What are your expectations? What kind of safeguards do you expect?
See, to start with, as somebody who admits to going through psychiatric treatment, I'm very clear about who should have access, who knows. I mean, though I don't have a problem, I'm sure as representing people who are going through a mental health problem. See, one of the first things, especially given our society's stigma about mental health, the first thing, they don't even want their relatives, even their parents, to know about their mental health situation. So if it is out there, see, a lot of these things were addressed in the last two presentations in terms of how it can be masked, Professor Animesh is this thing. But even if it's masked, if there is a possibility that it can be leaked, or even with e-manus, if I have a app on my phone and that phone leaks my medical data, that would be the first point of concern. Okay, but beyond that, just going back to what Professor Animesh was talking about, normativity, making, I'm not very sure. I'm not very sure that even if you make it normative, people would resist because there's so much data there. So I'm not very sure that people would resist wanting to access it because there are other models that can be built out of it. So see, particularly in the computing world, lot of developments have, not just in the computing world, across the history of intellectual property. It is basically, within quotes, theft of ideas. And I'm using theft in that sense, which has led to industrial revolution, which has led to computer revolution, which has led to internet revolution. So a lot of this knowledge out there used to be proprietary knowledge. So even open source code essentially is talking about, and again coming back to the question of proprietaries. So my personal concern is who would have access to my knowledge beyond the people to whom I have entrusted it to. If it goes beyond them, who is liable for the breach? And who can be held responsible for that breach?
Liability and accountability is okay. Great. Then, so that actually ties into where I was taking it. 15 trillion is okay. Can you give us an idea how much space are we talking of? To store that data, what kind of bytes are we talking of?
Okay, so this hard question. I don't have numbers, but like they have these data centers, right? So and these data centers are usually 4-story buildings with like 4 such panouts. So you can think of a 4-story buildings with 4 panouts, and then there are data centers of Google, data centers of like
Meta,
Amazon, and then there are these kind of like data centers across the world, especially in cold regions, in temperate regions, because there is a reason for that.
It becomes economical to maintain
cooling. So basically, so if you ask me about the energy, I would probably be able to give you more better.
So my reason for asking it is to basically get into my next question. Who has the resources to use this much data? Do you think academic centers have that kind of compute power?
No.
I'm not talking necessarily of India.
Not even Stanford.
So we are basically talking of, commercialized entities. Dr. Abhisek, would you want to chime into that? Who has the kind of compute resource to be able to, build a model from bottom up? Say, for psychiatric purposes, who do you think would be able to do that?
I think there is one thing which I not necessarily agree with the way you framed the question. I think if you want to build a good, let's say, psychiatric AI, like AI assistance for psychiatry, then would you rather go for quantity of data or go for quality of data? That is another important question which was missing in the first question. Now, in terms of the quantity of data and how one like the ability to process it, I think Animesh answered it well. Like, there is no academic institute in the world right now who has the compute power to process all these things, and it is inevitably these big platforms like Google's and OpenAI and Meta. They are the regular answers for if you want to talk about this sort of humongous amount of data. But in terms of quality data, maybe their academic institutions could actually come into the picture, where, like, let's say, as we are discussing right now, like there are legacy data, there are some data which we have, which, like, let's say, which are, let's say, clinical records or anything, and if someone wants to actually train models on those in-house, then that probably is a more feasible way where you prioritize quality rather than quantity.
Right. Thanks for correcting me there. I mean, I think I made an assumption there. But then just to be clear, are you talking of, taking one of the open source models and then using your data to adapt that open source model? Is that what we are talking of?
That could certainly be one of the approaches, because like with the pre-trained models, what they have is, like, they have now the language know-how. Now, as I was mentioning, that then they have to adapt to the certain use cases where they will be used, and for that purpose, maybe using uh, the specific data that, or the specific use case. So there comes purpose limitation. Like, if you want to do it if you want to use this model for a particular purpose, then train it for a particular purpose as well, and that might actually be helpful. Like, and in fact, there are multiple computer science research which are also pointing out that even small language models which are trained for a particular purpose are also doing as good as the larger language models, the more closed source language models, on those specific tasks as well.
Right. Thanks.
Can I ask a counter question? Yeah. It's basically about, I mean, I have two questions actually. So you talked about how much training ChatGPT has before it thinks. So for something like clinical material, what kind of numbers are we talking about? And what is the minimal number that you would need to be able to train models? Is there any kind of threshold that exists?
I mean, depends. So as Abhisek was pointing out, there are these small models which do fairly well specific tasks. For their, you don't need anything close to 15 trillion. So it probably, with even 25 million words tokens, you should be able to build a fair enough model. And 25 million words is not that big. I would imagine, like, Nimans has much larger data sets in terms of clinical notes.
Yes, we most likely would. We most likely would. And before I pass it to Abhisek, he might also have something to add. For the kind of adaptation that Abhisek was discussing, for very simplistic purposes, we have worked together, the two groups have been working together, and we have found somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 instances where there is an input and output pairing, X and Y pairing. 5,000 to 10,000 is good enough to adapt.
That is not even a GenAI model.
That's if you think of it. The backbone is GenAI.
Yeah.
The backbone is GenAI. But it won't be a general purpose model. So we'll be having a universe of models to achieve all our purposes. What do you think on that, Abhisek?
I totally agree with what both of you said, like both Animesh and Lekhansh said. The point is that going for a universal model is a much bigger challenge, and there are multiple concerns if you go for a much bigger model or much universal model as well. For example, let me just give you a brief example. Like, let's say right now, if you are using the same model for your let's say for your health checkups, the same model for your legal advice, the same model for your financial advice, you need to separate out, like in real world, when we interact with, let's say, doctors or lawyers or even different types of doctors, we do not go around sharing all the information with everyone, right? We have a specific information to share for a specific context. So like having a general purpose thing, like the very basic privacy concern which comes from these general purpose AI systems, the conversational AI systems, is there is no separation of this knowledge. Like the same model is acting as my medical advisor, and at the same time it's the same model which is acting as if it is my legal advisor as well. Now, like if you think about it, it's not an ideal setup at all, if you think about it. And in that case, I would rather have some universe of small models who are assisting in a specific purpose, rather than having a jack of all trades, but probably not a master of any of those.
Right. So I am guessing you're not a big fan of AGI. I mean, you don't like the concept of a model that can do almost everything that humans can. Just a wild guess.
Well, then what will humans do?
Oh, well, that's for us to figure out, I suppose. Okay.
No, but you see, even with all the developments that we have today, can you imagine like a single person? I mean, think of from a human perspective. Can a human really do everything? Can I do everything that you do? Can you do everything that I do? There are specialized knowledge systems. So that's how things have, evolved in the human society. Okay, so we are specialized for certain things. We are good at certain things. So doing things in such in collectivity, probably in certain context it is good, but at that scale of collectivity, I don't think it works. So this AGI and super intelligence is kind of too far-fetched.
Yeah, it's a very slippery slope, definitely.
But the very fact that these corporations have invested, as you said, those kind of things, doesn't one expect that that is exactly what they would be able to do? That is, look at the if I can use a word like intersectorality, to really, be superhuman in that sense.
Or aren't they trying to do that?
Yeah. So basically, see, for these corporations, I might sound a bit harsh, but it's more of a deception than of a reality. So what we were seeing, so I was doing a recent study with Abhisek and some of my students. So these corporations, for instance, OpenAI has started allowing you to interact with ChatGPT through voice. Suddenly this has started. I think this was a 2025 development. And what we see within 3-4 months, the amount of personal data that is being shared through audio is at least 2 to 3 times more than what you share through when you type through text. So the moment you go into this, unreality that you are, talking to ChatGPT, it is as if you are talking to a companion. You start feeling like that you're talking to a companion. And the model is able to better lure you to leak your private data. So you see, it's I don't know whether they have this overarching hope of, making one machine do everything, but they have this overarching hope of making money.
well, they are corporations. Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask a question? No, how does one sort of this? Almost everybody I know uses Gemini or ChatGPT, but how does one, especially, and you're right, especially since this voice thing came up, everybody's onto this. But how does one counteract that? There's no way I'm going to delete my Google or any of the apps he showed me. So how does one make sure that what information? I mean, I don't know. It's not just personal. I'm talking about a
very difficult question. So you are probably talking about interventions.
Yeah.
So what kind of interventions one could have? So that is, I think that is where, Lekhansh, that these are the places where academicians have more roles to play than building this kind of, giants. So probably academicians all over the world will never be successful in building this kind of giants, because you never see like a Stanford data center or a Caltech data center or any of the IITs. They will never have data centers, and you need data centers to train this kind of models. So what we can do is think of this intervention technique. So we have been trying to model this kind of interventions in terms of toxic data. So say somebody is trying to post certain toxic data, we try to alert the person. We analyze the toxic content, and before they can post, we try to alert the person. Then you could have incentive mechanisms built into the system, which will downvote you or put your posts selectively hide your post or shadow ban you or do things like that. But for this, so this could be done at a user level, at a personal level, but at the AGI level or the GenAI level, I'm not sure how you could put these interventions, because these are all black box models. You don't know what is going on or what is happening. Only things that you could probably have is to have a extension or a wrapper on this kind of model, which is also running along with along with the assistant. And now whatever you are typing and interacting with the assistant, this extension is also sniffing that. Then there is also a problem of privacy there.
Two people hearing me now. Yeah.
Now, but you are, so as if that extension or whatever is being installed by you is like a trusted third party. So, and this trusted third party is allowed to look into your data and generate alerts to you that, okay, at this point, probably you are going to leak, you are at the verge of leaking your information, your private data. Okay, so these kind of alerts could be, you could have mechanisms or built-in safeguards. So this will be independent of the assistant. The assistant is not going to give you these kind of alerts, but you'll have some other wrapper on top of it, which will oversee what you are interacting. And then, so it's like your father or your mother looking at what you are
big brother
doing, or a big brother kind of stuff.
So
Okay.
just to add into what Animesh just said, let me take a sort of a different route to come to that same conclusion. So when ChatGPT came in for the first time in 2022, people were not as good in using ChatGPT. The models were developing, and people were also developing, how do I probe or prompt these ChatGPT? Like, what is the question that I will ask that will give me a better answer? Now, a better answer for the mind of a normal person is something that would appease or that would adhere to what they want to listen or what they want, what is their information seeking. And so in this process, what happened is that we had the baseline of Google search, where we would go and search for some terms. Whereas the moment ChatGPT came in, suddenly those terms became a full-fledged question. And the more ChatGPT developed, those full-fledged single-line questions also start to have context. Like, see, I let's say let's assume that I am a person with cannabis addiction. Now I will instead of when I was googling it, how to get rid of cannabis addiction. Now I'm just framing a general purpose question. But with ChatGPT, now what people are doing, oh, I have been addicted with cannabis and it is sucking money out of my life. It is doing this, that. After all that context, they would ask the key question that they want to ask: how do I get rid of cannabis? And what Animesh is the way we are actually approaching to these things is that, can we have a sort of a nudge or a wrapper on the device of the user, which is not going to transmit the data, but it's just going to process on edge on the browser. Look, you need not send all this information. If you send all this information, then basically ChatGPT or any of the generative AI would basically have this information about you, that you are addicted to cannabis, that you want to do this sort of a thing. Rather, why don't you just, we could also recommend some reformulated versions of this query, which takes away that attribution in some sense. So it is more like you don't need to say that, oh, I have addiction, I have this, I have that. Rather, you could just say how you used to do in Google, how to get rid of cannabis addiction, where now so of course the sensitivity of the intent of the query is still preserved, but then there is no attribution to you. It could be anyone in your circle who might have this particular disease or addiction or any sorts of things. So that is one way of looking at it. And the other way, I think this is where probably we as researchers and computer scientists might actually be able to help the community better in understanding or in making people aware of the power of defaults. Like if you sign into ChatGPT right now, there are numerous settings which people do not know about, which enable their data to be transmitted to ChatGPT for training purposes. So you could actually turn those off, that you don't want ChatGPT to train on your data. Or you could actually like turn certain features off, which would not make it the perfect system, but at least it would reduce the risk. As Mr. Bobby were asking, that what could be some things which users could do in this space. Maybe just having awareness is the first step that to how to interact with these systems. It is still not really the like the society as a whole hasn't yet learned how to effectively have a conversation in a privacy preserving way.
I still am not clear.
Just a second, but I'll have to intervene because I have to, anchor the whole discussion back to the mental health research. So is that okay?
No, one
Please go ahead.
just one last thing. See, we live in a society where we don't read, especially online. Every website has a privacy agreement. I don't think anybody reads that before ticking the box. So I'm just wondering, in that case, how do you get a person with cannabis addiction to sort of say, now how do you even get that message to them?
Quick answer, Abhisek?
Maybe,
No, I think
maybe
he's
we
not talking of the. So I
yeah,
think
Animesh,
he's not
please go
talking
ahead.
of the single time privacy things. So these are settings that you can keep on monitoring. Like once you log in into the ChatGPT or these kind of forums, even Facebook, etc. If you go to your personal settings, every time you would see like you can go multiple times to that personal settings, and then there are these privacy tick boxes, and there you could tick box. So at some point maybe you feel that this conversation is not going to be privacy leaking, so you you might well not tick them off, or like at some other points, like when you feel that they are privacy leaking, I would tick them off, or you could permanently tick them off.
My point was that nobody knows about. I do tick them off.
That's what he's saying.
That's what he's saying. So we have to make people aware of that. I mean,
I will just add one bold claim over here, that when I was growing up, there was this Saksharta Abhiyan everywhere. Like we want people to become literate. Now is the high time that we as a country would also like to have a digital Saksharta Abhiyan, where we want to tell this thing to each and every person in this country.
Yeah, that just reminds me, it's there, it's mentioned. I mean, your idea is pretty much mentioned in the economic survey of 24-25, where the digital literacy is discussed. But then again, I am veering off from the way that we had taken, because I have to ground the discussion in what we were discussing. And so let's look at these two models. One is, from bottom up, bringing a foundation model, which Google has done in collaboration with 3 university hospitals. Another is what a lot of other, what we discussed, a universe of models where we may have the compute resources to fine tune already open source models for our purposes. Which brings me to the whole question, and I'm going to start from you, Dr. Animesh, and the main answer would be from Professor Pratima. This whole idea of open sourcing your data set, right? So let's look at data set, data as the oil. And if all the engines are concentrated with a few players, then what is the meaning of open sourcing? For example, tomorrow it's very hypothetical. I'm just taking the name of Nimans because I work here, very hypothetical. Tomorrow, if we were to de-identify 100%, we employ an army of people, we ensure no patient identifying information leaks. And for the betterment of treatment and research of mental health disorder, we were to release our data in the open, in one of, say, Hugging Face data sets or any of those, with proper guarantees that only teams that are worth their salt can access it. All those, the standard. Who do you think will first of all capitalize on this new data?
So I think, again, the people who have the largest number of resources, largest amount of resources.
How would we solve this then? This taxpayers' money, the data was collected with taxpayers' money. And now for me to say, I shall own it, I will not give it back to the community. Isn't that against the ethos of the whole open source?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So one way where like our community, the scientific community, we build our trust and we carry forward our trust is through writing proposals. So we should have there is this thing in the US for quite some time, but not much in India. We should have these data proposal drives. So somebody willing to access the data should write an end-to-end proposal of how they are going to use that data. And then there will be regular PRSGs through which they will show what developments have been done on this data. So in this way, if a big player is also coming, you have the complete control on the big player also, what he or she is going to do with the data, or what that third party is going to do with the data is known to you a priori. So this kind of data proposal. So I think at one point, Twitter started this before this crazy man took in charge. So Twitter started this university grants, but these grants would be in terms of data. So there were these different gradations like fire hose, green hose, and etc. etc. So I think that the winners would be given the green hose access for a limited amount of time. So I think 3 months or something, I don't remember exactly. So the idea was to leverage on this data to do certain interesting and important tasks for the societal well-being. Now, who do you think? So guess who were the winners of this data proposal?
I guess people from Meta or
all academics. All of them were academics. Not a single industry proposal. So that's the challenge. So the moment you ask industry to frame proposals, the amount of NDAs that they will have to sign to get to you with the proposal is enormous. And this is a lived experience that I have, while working with a lot of industries. So therefore, they are not going into this business of writing proposals and submitting to you. So it's always one way. So you ask to them, it's not the other way. The moment you ask them to feed something back to you, it's not going to be easy for them.
Okay. And before I go to Professor Murthy, there is another model. Small players, small local players approach, let's say, an imaginary hospital that has a lot of data. And this small player has some experience of developing a patient-facing thing. And they're asking for a collaboration. This small player is a registered startup, for-profit entity. And if you actually look at our funding things, for example, ICMR, it has a new framework of evaluating how productive a particular researcher has been. And the topmost marks are given for patents and did your, whatever research you did it become a product or not?
Translational.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's another model. It's not, so one is what you presented, large corporations, another is small startups approaching us. Data proposals could deter the large corporations seizing on the opportunity that a new data set has become available. Do you think it would also take care of these kind of collaborations between?
I think so.
Can I ask another supplementary question to that? I mean, for generating AI, like you, for example, can do a small software for looking at smaller data. Can you do the same with AI principles, or do you have to necessarily take it off the shelf from these giants?
Not always.
You can
Like, so for instance, like the example that Lekhansh was giving, the collaboration that we built with Shubham, so working. So some of the basic building blocks were like were taken, like these were rudimentary things that were taken from off the shelf. But then from there, where we went, reverse engineering it back is impossible, almost next to impossible. So therefore, like that way, we can say that we are like only 10% reliant
on
these proprietary players.
Okay.
If you want to be.
That's good.
Okay. And the main question to you, ma'am, how does one balance this? Because we have always believed that, the data belongs with the scientific community.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know I think one will have to ask what would be the interest of these kind of entities to get engaged in research. And inevitably, I don't know how much is the furthering of science vis-a-vis commerce.
That's the
And that is really the dissonance between the industry and the academic, that what is driving. Number one is commerce. The second is possibly, and I think now the country where these things originate also becomes important, because there are political kind of considerations around this. And the third thing is about control, I think. At the end of the day, now you're saying it's a new oil, right?
Yes.
So oil is about both money and about control. And that is the concern that I would have. How much, it's like you mentioned about patents, of, who actually has finally the ownership. And it's not so much about the jewelry, but really in terms of, when you say control, it's not just about ownership, but also what can happen subsequently with it, the misuse that can come out of it. And that is also
So with control, with leadership comes responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing.
Okay, and now I'm going to put it to you, Bobby. In the third model that we discussed, very many times it's not a free entity. So let me ground it a bit better. Let's say out of the grant that we are expecting to get, and you have some details on that, we have an option. The funder is actually asking us, would you want to commercialize this? Or would you want to open source it? Hear me out.
I'm not answering.
Now,
Now,
my model is likely to be trained by the very personal stories of probably 5,000 Indians who were accessing subsidized health services at centrally funded institutes of this country. What's your take?
I have a preface to that. Okay. So now we're commercializing in that extent. I think at some level, I do a lot of pro bono work, but even when I do pro bono work, I always take a small fee, because there's always a value. Otherwise, people don't value so I think commercializing is not a problem, as long as we are very sure what we are commercializing it for. So I think Demands has a good model. In that sense, it already has a good model in place. But it's also about, let's say, 5,000 people. You're talking about a sample size of 5,000. Would it be possible? My counter question, would it be possible that how can you ensure that this 5,000 is really diverse in terms of caste, sexuality, gender, or, I know that there are BPL people coming in here and all of that, okay? But how does this commercializing project, the moment you make it commercial, there'll be people who can afford, not afford, etc. But you're saying nominally chargeable, right? In which case, my question would be, how do you balance this? How do you get a really diverse, based on, like I said, and all of these things also affect mental health. Your caste affects it, your gender affects it, your sexuality affects it. So that would be my counter question.
Right. So
Let's also, come in there. I mean, what is commercial? What is commercialization? So it really is your definition of it. Are you talking about profits, or are you talking about the scale up that's possible? So if you can argue that what you do for 5,000 has a potential for scale up to 1.4 billion people, is that commercial value? Because for an organization which works in a non-profit kind of manner, reaching to people and having savings in health, etc., can that be viewed as commercialization?
right. So okay. I thought I was the one who was supposed to be asking question. Okay.
No, but this is about the project. So you brought it
I will
intentionally.
I'll broaden it. The question is, if a research gets productized, and the research actually originated from, say, people in a particular place or belonging to a particular background. And there's a lot of impetus to productize the research. And by productization, what I mean is, and what most funders mean is, at the end of it, are you going to open source the whole thing? Or are you going to keep it closed doors and start talking with industry partners? Have I got that broadly right?
Yes. So basically what they will want you to do is, so at the end of this kind of big projects, what you have in the tech terms is a prototype.
You
don't have a product, you have a prototype.
It's
Now,
a TRL3 or TRL4.
So this prototype has to be metamorphosed into a product.
Yes.
Okay. Now, at this point, as a builder, you have two options. One is to release the prototype to the community. And the second is to convert this prototype into a product. Now, most of the times, we academics do not have the energy or the scale to do it.
Yes.
So in such cases, what you do is you come into terms with some industry that could be a big partner, or like these unicorns that you are talking about. So you give it to them and they do the productization. So these are the two different angles. So if you are doing it open source, it remains in the prototype phase.
Okay. And that takes me to Dr. Abhisek. In the second version that Sir told, that you can, pair up with industry partners for scaling it up and productize it. How much control will this hypothetical researcher be able to, have? How much control will this person have in terms of what is the pricing of it? Let's say I have created a bot that can treat depression. Do you think when it scales up, when it actually goes to live and any and everybody can access it, at that time, will I be able to execute any amount of control on what is the pricing of it and who can afford it? Have you seen that happen in the industry till now?
I think it's a difficult question to answer. It depends on the kind of agreements that you are going to sign with the industry partners, because at the end of the day, it's more of a legal matter, like how much proprietary you will have, than a technical matter.
Even to believe I do.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
No, I think I'm finished. Like, I don't have any. I think this needs more legal expertise than anything at this
I
moment.
believe you do. Yeah, so
I believe
you see, like, think of this in terms of book royalties. So book royalties, what happens is, so there are three different models. One is at the time when you share your copyright, you get a one-time money, and you could forget after that. That's one model. Another model is like you get a signing amount, and then like you get a fixed royalty. Okay. So after every year, you get a fixed royalty. Or you could have a compounding royalty, which means that depending on the number of sales of that year, your royalty percentages actually vary. Okay. So and that is pre-agreed. Like if this much is the projected sale, this much will be the royalty. Now, So you will say, okay, I should always go with this third option because this always gives me benefit. But what happens if nothing gets sold in that year? Okay, so usually like people who write frequently bestsellers, they go for this third option. Okay, but then you have a choice there. So here also, I think when you do signing with this kind of unicorns, you have a model, and these models are mostly a priori. So whatever agreement you have, it will be a priori. So you cannot, after the third version goes out, like you cannot go and change the agreement model.
Do you think there could be a model that, see, this is a very large model, let Google serve this, but if the IP is from India, there shall be no charges. Do you think such an arrangement would ever occur?
I don't think so. Because they have their own business model. So their lawyers will never agree.
So then how do we make sure that or the benefits actually come back to the people whose data was used to make the solution?
The way I see it is one is a unicorn model where you actually can dictate what kind of agreement that you can make with them, where you have more negotiating power. With the big businesses, you do not have the large corporations, you do not have that because they have their battery of lawyers and they have their templates. More importantly, their templates, and they're not going to deviate from there. For them, the data that demands is just one fraction. For us, it's huge. For them, it is not. So for them, so they're not going to. So the best way would be to use a unicorn. And with an unicorn, it need not be just these three models of copyright.
Yeah, there could be many.
So you can have,
lawyers would know.
you can have any number of
different models.
You can even have partnerships. You can even have partnerships. So those are things that can be decided.
Sorted out,
Can be sorted out. But the point is, the moment you decide on a large corporation, you also need to be willing to give up the product at the end of the, completely say goodbye to it. And it's, yes.
So you see, that is why when you have these large corporations, they will make newspaper headings that we took over them. So this taking over means everything is gone. Right. So all this WhatsApp being taken over by Meta, etc., So that means everything is gone. So all
mergers and acquisitions.
Mergers and acquisitions. Yes.
Okay. So science versus commerce.
Yeah. So I think one idea is, to make it apart from the unicorns, the other way would be to do proactive governance. So at the government level, if you could and then there is another set of bureaucrats sitting there to stop you. But then if we are successful, for instance, in that sense, AI for Bharat and Bharat Gen has been to some extent, I would say, successful. Yes. At least they have, shaken the government to invest and stand beside them to popularize this Indic LLMs, Indic Gen AI tools. At least the people know that, okay, AI for Bharat, Bharat Gen is a supportive or is a initiative that is being supported by the Indian government. So if we could have something like that, even in newspapers, even in the paparazzi only, then also I think it would be nice to. That scaling might not be 1.4 billion, but that scaling could go up to a few millions at least.
Okay, and just to add to that, if it can sort of work within, like you said, the government or within an institutional framework, any institutional framework, it actually, it's a report, it might not, but access might be much more. In terms of access, it might be much more and much cheaper.
Okay.
Because the moment there's a third person, you're talking about cost.
Various. Yeah. Okay, so I think what we could conclude is there are a number of models. The ideal would be if a government setup could scale a solution that it developed with,
So for instance, I'll give you one example. So this disaster management response things. So most of these are built by either academics or these large software giants. So, but then the government has this policy that if you are doing it under the academic umbrella, then they would try to push you to share your tech with people in Bharat Shivastram. And they will take it forward to the ground.
Okay.
So we had a disaster management project. It was a pretty large project. So this was like mostly about cyclonic disaster around Sundarbans, etc., that area. So, and there was always a push from the ministry to make our tech accessible to these like rescue workers who are on the field. So these kind of government-oriented or government-supported NGOs are also a practical source through which
scaling it up.
Yeah.
Right. Dr. Abhisek, anything you would want to add? The benefit finally comes back to the community from which most data was taken. Any other models to ensure that?
I think I don't have anything particular to add over here. Yeah.
Great. Fine. So because we are running towards the time, any questions on the Q&A?
No questions. An observation by an anonymous person. As a patient, I don't want anyone to access my data. Only my doctors involved in my care get access to my data. But then now my doctor says that I don't have time for you. I will let AI deal with you. So I have to deal with this data access question because of my doctor.
But I just wanted to go back to that question and what Bobby also said earlier, which is really, about use of secondary data. I mean, you talked about masking, etc. But we do have provisions of ethics committees where if you identify the data, that you could use it without any kind of personal attributions to understand, for example, the way a hospital functions, to audit the hospitals, etc. So, I mean, that is still possible. Although one can argue at the end of the day, like that, I think it happened with stem cell research, right? That the initial family
got identified.
Provided that finally.
Henrietta, you're talking of Henrietta. Henrietta.
It's that happened almost 5-6 years later.
HeLa cells.
Yeah, the HeLa cells. Yeah. So, so.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
There's one question which just came. In affective computing, what do you see as the biggest gap between current emotion detection model and genuine social understanding?
In affective computing, the biggest gap between?
Current emotion detection models and genuine social understanding.
General social
Genuine.
That's a highly technical question, but since we have another 5 minutes.
It's by effective computing, like one has to understand like what kind of devices that one is talking about. Like it could be, an eye gear or a head gear or different types of gears are there. And I'm not sure because I'm not very conversant with that field, but what I understand is that there is a lot of AR/VR techniques being used there these days. And these again are based on GenAI models. Many of these are again based on GenAI models, especially agentic frameworks. So I think those models have gone beyond emotion detection. So they are like trying to gauge the genuine social setting of the person. They are trying to gauge probably the linguistic ability, other type of mobility related capacity of the person, in addition to simple trying to read the emotion levels from the brain. So I think that is, the technologies have developed way
Far beyond recognition.
Just from recognition, so earlier there was a point when it was only recognition, but now it's more holistic.
Okay.
At least that much I can say, but again, there could be privacy breaches, etc. All of these are there, but then so there is always two sides of the coin.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Fine. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes, and I'm going to therefore ask for key takeaways from all the 4 panelists, starting from Dr. Abhisek. Any key points that you want us to remember from this discussion? Or do you want us to circle back to you and I'll collect it here first?
Feel free, I would like to go last.
Okay, that's the most difficult one because all the shallow, yeah, never mind. So any key points for us on this thing?
So I think so I always used to, answer history questions using points. And so I always scored less because my history teachers never loved points. They would love quizzes. But I have seen over time, like when I am teaching the same stuff to my daughter and she writes in points, our teachers actually acknowledge them better. So, and what I see is that in those days we were taught history. These days, the entire subject name has changed and they call it social sciences. So I think like everything that you do, if you have the scientific angle or the scientific bent of mind, guiding you, I think you will work automatically responsibly. So science teaches you to be responsible, So that is one thing. So if you're doing good science, if you're trying to do good science, you automatically become responsible. So here also the same. So you see, like all the things that we talked about today, we were trying to figure out ways to do good science and to eliminate the bad science. So that was what we were trying to. So we talked about small models. So that was also elimination of the bad science in terms of this like overarching big models, holistic models we don't want. We were talking of we are kind of having a guilt feeling that we are sitting on like silos of data, but we are not able to share it. Mainly because there is no standards in practice or in place through which we could share. So I think these two were the major takeaways. And the third one is like whether to go after money or to go after, well-being. So this was so commercialization versus like helpfulness. So these were the three things that I felt like were the key outcomes of.
Bobby?
Yeah, in fact, interesting that Dr. Animesh said that because I'm just going to inverse that. Because the way I see it is, very often people think that science is objective. Science doesn't come with bias. And what has happened is, especially, I'm sure you know that better, because with people studying technology, their sense of ethics or sense of social sciences, and that becomes a huge problem when you're talking things like AI or other technology related thing, and they believe they're doing technology and they believe there is no effect because it's neutral. Science is neutral. Like you said, good science requires good social science and vice versa. They actually need to walk hand in hand. So having said that, I think the other important thing that we need to sort of, given my role here, one of my roles here, I think one thing that, and I'm sure we are going to be discussing that
After this as well.
As well. What kind of protections or what kind of rights would patients have? The whole, whether it be in access to the model when a model is created and how they interact with the model, what are the rights, what are the securities they have? I think that
is a major issue.
Yeah, it's a major concern.
Right, thank you. Dr. Abhisek, I'll make you second last, make your job a bit easier.
Sure. I was just looking at the title of the panel discussion. Like the title right now reads Our Data, Their Model, Whose Benefits? A Panel on Justice in AI for Mental Health. My key takeaway from this discussion today, like first of all, I'm really, really happy and excited to be a part of it and to see some people who are trying to develop something and before developing, they're actually deliberating on what sort of checks and balances they want to have, which is a very useful point at which we are deliberating on these topics. And the thing which I'm sort of taking away is that, so it's data subjects data, and it's our model, like the data controller model being you all being the data controllers, and you want to build a model which would benefit your data subjects, not necessarily you. And for that, you not only need the utility part, like whatever utility you have in mind that you want to develop, but also it's really I'm really happy to see that you're also taking care of sort of the privacy and all the user rights that your data subjects will have. So first of all, like I think at the end of the day, I would really thank you all for being so thoughtful about this entire process.
Thank you, Dr. Abhisek. And you kind of answered the questions. So our data, their models, whose benefit, you kind of gave the roles to it. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your kind words. And ma'am, your summary.
So, I mean, I'm just going to
Did
go
we
a little
veer
bit
too
beyond,
off?
yeah,
Yeah.
a little beyond the topic
Okay.
to probably kind of lead into the rest of the discussion. One of the most exciting things is really to determine probability. And I think we have opportunity now, based on our learnings of the past, to be able to determine that and to be able to predict from these models what kind of symptomatology you pick up, what kind of responses. So I think that the opportunity is huge. And then we all talk about personalizing treatment. And therefore, to be able to, use data to be able to personalize treatment, particularly when it's less expensive for patients, is, I think, a huge winner. But of course, finally, it has to translate into public interest. So therefore, the larger good, I think, has to determine it. But at the same time, I think we also need to talk to people about this larger good. I mean, rather than only talk about privacy, which is very, very important. And, privacy and protection of information is important. But if there is a way we can do that reasonably, but be able to, do things for the larger good, we need to do. But the commercial vis-a-vis larger good is still something I haven't factored in my head.
So I would like, so Lekhansh, like when you were asking these questions to us, like we are on one side of the table, and I would completely agree with ma'am about, going and asking these people, your patients, these 5,000 subjects, what are their expectations? Suppose you have a model tomorrow. What would they expect? You will see nice answers coming up. So for this GDPR study, we actually went ahead and did a survey with like 140 people and started asking them what are their expectations of the data that GDPR should give them, GDPR rights should give them from each of these platforms. And when we got this data and we just clustered them into groups and tried to see, and when we tried to match with what GDPR access rights are giving them through all these platforms, many of them don't match with their expectations. So what DDP is giving to them and what they are expecting the DDP to give, they don't shake hands. So I think before building such a tool like this, since this is a massive effort that we are wanting to give, we should also know their expectations.
And it's precisely for that reason that the next session is the co-design session, where it's only going to be people who have lived experience of these problems, and the research team would be deliberating on it. But to summarize I think it's already been summarized substantially.
Small thing.
Probably another 2 minutes. Yeah.
No, I don't even need. I think we need to break ahead. I just wanted to respond to ma'am. I don't think we need to break ahead about the commerce process, because I think it's something that should grow organically, in terms of how the project, No,
I'm not talking about it with respect to this project. I'm saying that the larger interests are always an issue.
They always clash.
No, and I was also particularly saying that because Lekhansh was asking, one factor he did not bring in is the fact that, in terms of our roles here, that we're all government employees. So I don't think we should forget that either when we're talking about engaging and, scaling up. So that was the point I was talking about, limited point there.
So remember those days when we were forced to travel only through air. What a relief.
Right. Okay. But having said that, I mean, there are these models where at the end of the research, you are supposed to, come up with a plan of how you scale it up.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Dr. Abhisek, and thanks a lot to everybody who joined in. I think this would be the end of the session for